Now let's talk about creating UVs for our characters. So up to this point, we haven't really needed UVs because UVs are mainly to have texture maps or things like normal or displacement maps, and they're based on a sort of UV layout, which is kind of a 2D representation of our 3D model. Now there are some tools in ZBrush that can be better if you have UVs on your model, but there's nothing to say you have to have UVs at this point. And if you're going to keep it the model within ZBrush, you may not have to have UVs at all, right? Because the texture is not based on UVs and we can see all the sculpted detail. But if we're going to be getting our models out of ZBrush and into another application, we'll likely want to have a UV-based texture and or normal displacement maps. So in those cases, we may want to create some UVs. So to do that, we're going to take our geometry down to the lowest level. And in our tool palette, we're going to come down to UV map. And if this is grayed out, that lets you know that there isn't a current UV map on this. And so if we come down to create, you can see these are the types of UVs that we can create here. And these are more very basic projections and tiling methods that are not as human readable as some other methods that we'll look at in a second. We can choose the size of the UV map here, and then we can click one of these buttons to project it. So if we do like a planar projection, this UVP, and then we could come down to texture map, and we could say, if we just say new from polypaint, it'll create our texture based on the UV map and create it with the polypaint information. So in this case, you can see for the planar map, it just did a straight projection, which is not really that useful. We can try a cylindrical projection. Our texture looks odd because it's still using that old texture. Let's do a new texture from polypaint, and you can see that's what this looks like, which again, not really that useful. So let's try a tiling method. So we'll do group UV tiles. Come down to texture map and new from polypaint, and you can kind of see that these are all broken up into these different tiles, but they do look fine if you take a look at it. But if you go in and you want to modify this texture at all, it's going to be very difficult because it just has so many seams, okay? Now when you do this, you typically actually want to be at a higher subdivision level, because then you'll be able to save out your, see how this is very low res? You'll be able to get all of that detail in here. So if I go up to a higher level and then do new from polypaint, then we get that higher resolution detail in there, but it's still based on the tiled UVs. So when doing UVs from this sub palette, you're not going to really get the custom UVs that you can get in another application. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just delete our UVs. And we've got our texture off. Let's take a look at it another way. So let's go down to our lowest level here. And let's go to Z plugin, and we're going to choose UV master. So this will allow us to get more of a kind of unwrapped look at this. And so if we just do an unwrap, let's turn symmetry on. We don't have any existing UV seams, so that's fine. We'll just do a quick unwrap without any settings. So then we can come up to our top level, go down to texture map, and if we create a new texture from polypaint, you'll be able to see how that has kind of pelted it or unfolded it. And again, this isn't the best UVs that you can get. The best UVs would be if you went out to something like Maya or 3ds Max or an application like that and had complete control over the UVs. That way you could make them completely clean, and you are welcome to do that. All you have to do is export your low level, go up and export it as an OBJ, or you can use GoZ with GoZ enabled applications. Send that over, do the UVs, and then send it right back, and those UVs will become updated. But if you want to do UVs here in ZBrush, this is kind of a good way to do it. Now, in taking a look at this, you can see that we do have seams. If I just go new from UV map, it'll kind of show you the seams that we have. So we have kind of a seam up here, and we may not want that. We probably don't want that. So let's go ahead and I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to come into the Z plugin, and I want to just make sure I go down to the lowest level here. I want to use I'm going to use control painting. And so I want to use this on a clone. So I'm going to say work on clone. And then we want to enable control painting, and we want to protect areas. So I'm going to turn on protect. And this is going to allow us to paint this magic color of protection over the areas that we don't want any seams to be. And so we could kind of paint up here on the belly. Maybe we don't want any up on the top of the head, or, you know, on the side there. You're going to have seams somewhere, but we can kind of protect those areas. And then we can come in and attract seams to other areas. So let's say we want to kind of attract the seams to the back and to the top of the head. And this isn't it's not an exact placement, but it can kind of help. And so now we can do another unwrap. And you can see the seams on the body look pretty good, but up on the face, maybe not so good. So you can come back in and go to protect. And maybe it's just going to take a little bit more. And you're not going to be able to get it perfect with this method, but hopefully you'll be able to get something closer. We can also go to erase to kind of erase areas. So there's a lot going on in the head, so I don't know if that's going to work too well, but you can also, if you want to use polygroups, which we haven't really talked about, but it's just kind of a method of separating out your polygons into selection groups. So let's go ahead and just do an unwrap. Remember, this is on our clone. And we'll go new from UV map. That actually looks pretty good. So now what we can do is take our UVs, and we're working on a clone, remember, so we want to come down here, we want to copy our UVs, and then we want to come back and go back to our original tool and paste the UVs. Paste UVs. And then we'll check that again, and we can go back up to our higher level to check it. Okay, so we get something like that. And you can check it there as well. Okay, so that's a look at how we can start to do UVs. You can also, again, export out your lowest level as an OBJ, do the UVs in another application, and then re-import it into that same subtool, and it won't affect the upper levels at all, assuming that you haven't changed point order and things like that. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at UVs, let's kind of go into more of, saving out these textures and also calculating normal maps. So let's do that next.